Hello everyone, welcome back to the Vocally Annotated podcast. My name's Sarika, and today I want to talk about something I've been noticing a bit more recently. You know what else I haven't noticed? My dry hands, and I'm gonna go remedy that now. Okay, so what was I saying? Oh yes, the recession. So obviously we are in a recession, or we're technically not, and we haven't been, but like we pretty much are, right? I think everyone can agree that certainly in the UK, and I can only really speak for the UK, although I'm about to speak a lot about the US, but that's all stuff that I've seen on social media. But anyway, the UK has been in a recession for a while, very much a COVID after effect thing. And this note popped up on my Substack, well, in my notes feed the other day, which I will have put on the screen. I'll put it on the screen right now. But basically, talking about the latest Coach collection and how it's full of distressed clothes. You know, the clothes are a bit pilly. They've got writing on them in pen, and they just overall look very beat up and used. And so it kind of feels like a thing of like, right, well, if we're in a recession, then the designers are going to show clothes that are a bit more distressed and like worn and lived in to the point of looking a bit old and ratty. Because that's just like the current climate, no one can afford to buy new things. So from that perspective, it makes sense. However, I've then also seen two conflicting things, which can be summed up in this other note that I saw on my feed, which is about how all these people are doing no buys, and yet consumption is still expected to go up, shopping's still expected to go up. I know, well, I've seen part of that has to do, again, we're talking about the US here, with Trump's plan to put tariffs on things, and so people are trying to like get all their shopping in now to get ahead of the tariffs. I guess implying that like people won't be doing it once things are more expensive, and then things are really gonna like the landscape is gonna look very different. Also, in general, I've seen a lot of other things that have been like a lot of people specifically on TikTok have been talking about doing no buys. How successfully those are gonna go is like a different story altogether, right? But like the intention is to do a no buy, partly for like consumption reasons and to cut down on overconsumption in their own lives and for their wallets, again, in this time of recession, but also to send that blow to the Trump presidency economy and, you know, not stimulate the economy by purchasing things. And then I already also mentioned the tariffs and how those are going to make things more expensive as well anyway. And all of this, I thought, tied in very neatly with this other TikTok by Suzanne Lambert. And if you haven't seen Suzanne Lambert on your For You page, essentially she's gone viral for creating this kind of Republican makeup look, and she's put that out there on TikTok, and yeah, loads of Republicans have been arguing with her, like in her DMs or whatever, or comments, and then lots of non-Republicans, like Democrats or whatever, have then jumped on the trend and have been making their own version of the Republican makeup looks. But she made this one particular TikTok that I thought was quite interesting, and she was talking about, you know, just because you're poor doesn't mean you look bad. Like, you, in fact, learn how to take better care of your clothes because you know that you won't be able to afford other clothes. So you learn how to mend things, you learn how to replace buttons, you learn about depilling, and you learn about all these things to take care of your clothes. I mean, she was responding to a comment on a TikTok she'd already made, but basically the idea she was getting at was that, you know, poor people don't look bad because they're poor. Like, looking raggedy and distressed, a la the Coach collection that I talked about at the beginning of this video, and, you know, not having money, not having disposable income, are not going to be like the same group of people for those reasons. And this whole thing just really came together to remind me of this episode of Articles of Interest, which I mentioned Articles of Interest in. It's another podcast. I've mentioned it in other episodes of this podcast as well, because I really love it. It's one of my favorite podcasts. I find, like, as someone who has two podcasts, I am very picky about the podcasts I listen to. Like, it really has to mesh well with my brain in a certain way for me to want to listen to it. But Articles of Interest, Articles of Interest is one of those things. There's one of those podcasts. Anyway, in I think the third season, on American Ivy, second episode, Avery Trufelman, that's her name, she talks about Bankara, and it basically was this movement in Japan at the time of the Meiji Restoration. So the Emperor Meiji was trying to push for modernization, industrialization in Japan, and he had said that all Japanese men have to wear this particular uniform. They have to wear Western dress from now on. And it was very strict in terms of clothing, what you're allowed to wear, and therefore like your expression in that medium. And so Avery Trufelman talks about the concept of Bankara. And Bankara, the way she describes it in the podcast is that essentially it was about letting your clothes get worn. Because if you can only wear one thing, and the expectation is that you keep it maintained and groomed, which I feel like is a very Japanese thing, like they really take pride in their appearance, right? But you kind of like do the opposite by letting your clothes get worn, letting them get a bit shabby. I have since looked this up in preparation for this episode. I was actually going to write this up on Substack initially, because I didn't think I had that much to say about it. But then as the dots were like coming together in my head, I was like, no, actually I want to do this as a podcast. But yeah, so I looked into Bankara a bit more just to get another perspective on it. And so based on the things I read, it wasn't just like you let your clothes get shabby. A lot of the like men who were participating, I think it was like mostly men, if not all men, but like I've only seen and heard men mentioned in relation to this movement. But it wasn't just about them letting their Western dress get shabby. They were also wearing Japanese dress, like traditional Japanese dress, like hakama trousers and whatnot, whatever it was, the haori, and they were letting that be shabby as well. And the idea was that like this was a more Japanese version of masculinity, and there was an element of masculinity in it, in the ideas of the movement, which I think also correlates to like why I've only really seen men talked about it. Not that I'm some great expert on it, but you know, in whatever base reading I've done. But there was also an element of like not caring about how we look because the soul is more important than the outward appearance, which also obviously makes no sense because you're still caring about your outward appearance very much. There's one particular article I've seen also links it to very right-wing ideas of like traditional versus modern and the national versus the global, and that kind of not feud, but like what's the word I'm thinking of? That dichotomy that exists in a lot of has existed in a lot of nation states' history. It exists a lot now as well, also, which actually I think ties back nicely to the idea of like Trump era America, and again the kind of like far right ideas coming out of that. Actually, in Gone with the Wind as well, there's this passage where they're talking about this is like post American Civil War, and it's set in Atlanta, so it's very much like was affected by the Civil War, was demolished, now has to rebuild. And they're talking about how among that certain like that certain class of people, there's this idea that you should be genteel in poverty rather than making money by doing business with the carpetbaggers and the Yankee officers, because the book is set from a Confederate perspective. But I wonder if those ideas are going to be mimicked in the Trump presidency as well among Republicans and Republican voters, like the idea of being genteel in poverty and embracing looking a bit unkempt, embracing tradition in that respect. Like, is that going to apply? Editing Sarika here, and I just wanted to clarify what I was saying. So, like, is it going to apply as a form of national pride to be looking a bit scruffy, like as a form of nationalism? Is what I was getting at, and therefore will it become a thing that like the right wing accepts? Obviously the context is a little bit different, and then it just kind of like calls to mind that quote that I've been seeing everywhere since like the election was announced, and especially since the presidency began, which is the quote like history doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes. But it is giving elements of that, especially if the Bankara movement was as like right wing as this particular website says. I'll just leave a link below if anyone wants to read it. But it then becomes more interesting in the context of articles of interest in American Ivy and the guy who ended up like saving American style. It's very interesting. Like I thoroughly, highly recommend going and listening to that season of Articles of Interest, which will also be linked below. But having said all this, there is also a very good argument to be made for the left taking on this kind of Bankara style. And maybe not like, maybe I shouldn't be calling it Bankara because it doesn't have all the like meaning attached to it that Bankara does. Like we just talked about the right wing ideas, but it's certainly when it comes to not over consuming and not exploiting people who are going to like be the kind of people who would want to um, affect the economy by not buying into things, not building up the economy to affect the Trump presidency. But essentially, and like the overarching theme of this episode was that you've got the recession, you've got the Trump presidency, you've got people doing no buys, you've got people buying more in response to the tariffs, and it all just kind of could come together. Like I can see it, the case being made for it to all link together under this umbrella of like bunker aesthetics, and people starting to take pride in the fact that their clothes are worn, their clothes are old, they're getting use. From a political standpoint, I think that could be a really like good move in that respect. And yeah, like I said, it plays into a lot of the ideals that are upheld on the left. So kind of taking the right wing idea, if we're accepting that understanding of Bankara as like upholding right wing ideals or standing for right wing ideals and twisting it and co-opting it for the left's own benefit. There's also other arguments to be made for like wearing your clothes until they're worn, enjoying them, using them. Hannah Louise Poston, whose videos I really enjoy, she recently posted a video on deprogramming her obsession with newness and talking about enjoying or like learning to appreciate oldness in clothes. I can't think of a better way to say it right now, but basically appreciating that yes, these clothes are worn, they've had a life, they've been loved, rather than always wanting the next new shiny thing. So from that perspective, this kind of aesthetic really lends itself well to that, which also links to an article by the Pattern Recognition Substack, which I'll link below, that I thought was really interesting and I enjoyed very much. And it's about being cool, but specifically cool through patina. Like having old worn things is cool. And the article goes into like way back when furniture first started being mass produced, rich people like the upper classes would prefer to have furniture that was gently used because it was like, you didn't buy this furniture and you're not new money. You've had this in your family for a long time. It's been worn, it's been used, it's been handed down to you. And the same thing can apply with fashion. Like you look at something like Mary-Kate Olsen's Birkin and how beat up that is, how much she has loved that bag. I think it was also her Balenciaga City bag. Like she just wears her bags into the ground, which is great. Which also comes back to that idea of like deprogramming the obsession with newness by now attaching that obsession, I guess, to the idea of oldness and things being worn and loved and really like worn in. And speaking of old cool, I've also got here in my notes a bullet point about this Substack article I read. And in it, this woman was talking, it was about winter fashion. And the woman who wrote it was talking about how she's never owned a black puffer coat in her life. And she's very proud of that fact. And I don't like that. That did not sit right with me. Yes, I own a black puffer coat. That's not why that didn't sit right with me. I'm just so against the anti-black puffer coat hate that's going on online right now. Like it started as like, you guys know there are other coats you can wear in the winter, right? Like it doesn't just have to be the black puffer coat. You can wear other things if you want to, and that was fine. But like anything else, it's gotten out of hand, and now it's people being like, "Oh, I'm so proud that I've never owned a black puffer coat," and trying to use that as a symbol of old cool. That you've never even owned a black puffer coat. Not that even like you don't own one now, you don't wear it now. You never owned one. It just sounds ridiculous to me. Like, how are you being elitist about a coat? So I guess there's something to be said for not buying a lot of clothes and making sure that you use the things that you already have, and how it ties into a lot of the like objectives of the left. So it could be a good movement for the left, it could be a good look. And it also ties into this idea that patina is cool, using your things until they fall apart is great, not just from a like political perspective, but also from an aesthetic perspective. And then I guess finally to end, like not having ever owned a black puffer coat doesn't make you better than everyone else. So calm the fuck down. So I think that's everything I have to say. So thank you very much for listening. I have some very interesting, fun episodes coming in the pipelines next. I was actually supposed to be recording a different episode today, but those plans fell through. But that will still be coming soon. It will be an interview, and that is very exciting to look forward to. And yes, I'm currently being crushed under the weight of assignments, so I'm doing my best to get these out, hopefully more regularly, but we're doing what we can. So thank you very much for listening, everybody. Take care, and bye-bye.